Good morning, everyone. The text for our message this morning is the text that was read, Exodus 33, verses 12 through 23. I'm not going to read again, but I'll be referring to it, and I'll point out the verses that I'll be referring to. But this is the story, as we heard, of Moses dealing with God after the people made an idol for themselves. They sinned against God. And I want to reflect on God's forgiveness. And actually, how do we know that God forgives? I'm sure you have been offended, or you offended someone at one point. And what happens when we are offended? Two possible things. First, anger, resentment, wishing the worst to the offender. We don't want to even talk to the offender. Or possibly, another alternative is forgiveness, reconciliation, restoring the relationship. I would even say maybe the hardest part is restoring the relationship. We can say, okay, I'll forgive you, but please don't come to my house anymore, please. Sometimes we forgive, but we don't want to have the relationship. Well, I look at this text and I ask myself, what happens when God is offended? Put in a different way, what happens when we offend God? And here's a passage that comes right after a serious offense of the Israelites against God. If you go back, just one chapter, you see that chapter 32 is that episode where the Israelites, they make a golden calf for themselves. God had taken them out of Egypt. God led them to the Mount Sinai, and called Moses up to the mountain, and he showed his glory up on top of the mountain, and he made a covenant with the Israelites. And in this covenant, he gave the 10 Commandments and several other laws. The first two of these commandments was, "You shall not have other gods before me," and you shall not make for yourselves an idol. Well, needless to say, it did not take too long for them to break the first two commandments. And what's happening right now? So God calls Moses up to the mountain again and says to Moses, look, I don't want to just give you laws to obey. As a matter of fact, I want to be with you. I want to live among you. I want to build a house for me, a temple, a tabernacle for me. So Moses is up there in the mountain, getting all these instructions in how to build a place for God to live among them. And what happens? People down there gets impatient. So there's a serious offense against God. Then we see in the verses we read, the intercession by Moses, then you have punishment, and you have forgiveness. And we can ask again, how does this affect the relationship of the people with God? So I want to briefly take a moment to look at this offense, um, and then how God is willing to restore his the relationship. Verses 4 and 5, we read that when the people heard these harsh words, they mourned, and no one put on ornaments. For the Lord had said to Moses, say to the Israelites, you're a stiff-necked people. If for a single moment I should go up among you, I would consume you. So now take off your ornaments, and I will decide what to do to you. Like I said, Moses is up on top of the mountain, hearing from God the instructions of how to build this tabernacle. We could say they're sitting down in their desk and drawing their blueprint of how this tabernacle is going to be. And what's so wrong about what the people did? It wasn't just because they built an idol, an object, this golden calf. What led them to build this golden calf was exactly because they wanted some protection. Chapter 32 starts like this. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to them, come, make gods for us, who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So basically, the issue was, okay, Moses took us out of Egypt and he left us alone. Now, how do we go from here? And there's actually an irony here, because God is there drawing the plans to build his tabernacle among the people, and the people gets impatient and they want to see some real sign of divine presence. How do we know? We don't know what happened to this Moses. And we have to think that they probably see in Moses the representation of God. So they would think that Moses, he was the sign that God was present. If Moses wasn't there and he was taking too long, we don't know what happened to Moses. Well, we need somebody to protect us. We need some God, some divine being to protect us. So if we don't have it, we make one. So let's say that the worst offense about idolatry is that is not the object, is not only the material representation of a divine being. The worst offense of of the idol is that we substitute God for something that we can see, we can touch, we can make sure it's there with us. And what happens with that? Um, God, of course, wants to punish them. God sees from up there and says to Moses, look, go down because your people that you took out of Egypt, they turned away and they made an idol. And God says, and Moses says to God, no, Lord, don't get too mad here. Let me go down. I'll take care of that. You know, you're being you're being too quick to condemn the people. Moses, and God says, okay. Now, when Moses gets down there, he gets so mad that he gets those stones that God had sent, the tablets, and he crash it on the ground and break them because he gets so mad what they did. So it wasn't a little thing. It was a major offense. It's so serious, this offense, that we see in verse 3, I think we read 4 and 5, right? In verse 3 also says, God is saying to Moses, go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go up among you, or I would consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. This is God is saying, okay, fine, no problem. Plan B. You keep on going. You're still going to get there. You're going to go to the land. I promised the land, and you're going to get there. Go on. The change of plan is, I'm not going with you. I'm not going with you. I'm not going with you because I can get out of control. My anger can get out of control, and I may even, um, you know, I may even wipe you out. So the first thing we notice in this passage is that, um, in fact, our sins cause a separation from God. There are consequences to the disobedience in our sins. God's anger could wipe out the people. Is as God is very conscious, is letting his servant Moses know very clearly that his anger is for real, and if he goes along with the people, he does not have control of what may happen to the people. As I said, my topic for the sermon is how we know God forgives. As I was rereading the passage in my sermon, I thought, well, maybe I should rephrase this topic. Not sure if you agree. I think I would rephrase it like God dealing with his emotions. Because God is angry. And he's saying, look, I don't know what may happen from now on. You know, and you may have heard the idea that in the Bible there is some anthropomorphisms or anthropopathism or patism that talks about God in terms of human forms or human emotions. So we read in the Bible about God's hands, God's face, God's eyes, God's hand, and we hear in the Bible God's anger, God's joy, and so forth. They're all human feelings, emotions, and forms to say something about God. John Calvin would use the word is a sort of a accommodation. God speaks in our language so we can understand. Not that God has literally hands or eyes or face and so on, but this is how it expresses. So as I read this chapter, I see a lot of God's emotions here. God's anger because of the sin of the people, anger because not because just because they made this object, but is that they wanted that object would substitute God's protection. Even then, and this comes to our second point, God is willing to restore the relationship. It's true. Our sin has serious consequences, and one of them is our separation from God. And it's interesting how this will develop. God is willing to contain his anger. How? He tells Moses, for the first thing is, he tells Moses to go on and, I better not go with you because this may not turn out very nice. So that's a way of God saying, okay, I'm not going to do anything wrong with y'all. I'm not going to wipe you out of the map, but I better not be tempted to do that, let's say, as if God would be tempted. The people are shocked. They needed God. Actually, that's exactly what led them to the idolatries, because they didn't know what was happening to Moses, and they said, well, we need somebody, we need some divine presence here, so we need to make one so we can be certain that we have a protection, we have a divine being. So they needed God, and they said, okay, and then um, Moses comes to God and says, verse 4 is when they get shocked, they mourn, and no one put on ornaments because of what the Lord said to them. And then I think when it comes to verse 12, Moses says to God, see, you have said to me, bring up this people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now, if I have found favor in your sight, show me your ways, so that I may know that you may know you and find favor in your eyes. And God says, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And Moses says, if your presence will not go, do not carry us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight? Moses sort of bargains with God. Says, you're not going? Well, you're not going either. We're not leaving this place if you're not going with us. If your presence doesn't come with us, we're not leaving. We'll only leave here with you, with God. So God sort of tells Moses, okay, let me give me a few minutes to think through and decide what I'm going to do. And then he continues his conversation, and God promises his presence. Their problem was not that they did not want God with them, but they wanted to substitute God for something more immediate, like that idol. I come to think that idolatry is always an attempt to make up something in exchange for God. The issue here from the beginning is God's presence, protection. We don't know about this Moses. Well, we're by ourselves here. We can't be by ourselves. We need some protection. So they make an idol. I'd say that secular idolatry today is when people seek things to substitute for God. Money, power, pleasure, people desire what God can give, but they don't have patience to wait for God to give. They make up for it. They make these things that will give them some sense of protection, some sense of, I have something that gives me a sense in life. So when God says that he's not going with them, they panic, and they, like I said, they say, well, we're not going either. And after some thoughts, God says, okay, my presence will go with you. And Moses asks a question again, but how do we know? How do we know that God is with us? And before that, God reassured Moses that he does forgive. Actually, he repeats in chapter 34. He will repeat that. He's a merciful God. He will forgive. And this comes to verse 16, our third point. How do we know God forgives? Put in a different way, Moses' question. How do we know God is there? How do we know that we found favor in the eyes of the Lord? Verse 16 says, it's the question, for how shall I be known, for how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people, unless you go with us? In this way, we shall be distinct, and I and your people from every people on the face of the earth. It's important, this question. How should we know that we have found favor in the sight of the Lord? Isn't it his presence among us? His presence. Actually, Moses is saying even more. He's saying, this is what distinguishes those who belong to God, God's favor. This will mark us as distinct among other people, and every people will know, every people from the face of the earth will know. What is the mark? What is the sign that God is a forgiving God? Is his presence among his people. Of course, the question is, how do we see his presence? We don't see it. How do we see his presence? He is present through his person, spirit. In a way, we can say that religion or religiosity is a way to offer the offender, you and I, a proof that God is present or not. So, like, for example, if you're a well-to-do person, if you're healthy, if everything's going well with your life, well, it's a sign that God is blessing you. Now, if you're sick, if things are not going too well in your life, well, it's a sign that God's not with you. So we tend to give these concrete signs of God's presence or absence. To me, this passage is amazing passage of trust and confidence in God's favor. It has a profound theological significance. Some say that we have here a very distinct way, a distinct theology proper of God's presence and in the Bible. Why? Because Moses says, "Okay, we want you, God, but I want you. I want something else." Verse 18: "Show me your glory, I pray." Moses wants actually a real proof, a visible proof that God is there. What's God's answer? Verse 19: "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you the name, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. But," he said, "you cannot see my face, for no one shall see me and live." And he makes a deal, let's say. He makes a deal with Moses. "Okay, you want to see my face? I'm not going to show you my face. But I will do this. I will pass by, and you better hide yourself in a cave here behind that, rock and so on. And as soon as I pass by, you can peek. Look out, and you're going to see me from behind. But you're not going to see my face." What does this mean? What is this passage telling us? For one, like Moses, he wants to see a visible proof of God's glory. And God is saying, no, this is not about seeing me. It's not about seeing my face. This is not about, I saw God. It's about what? It's about proclaiming my name, my goodness, my favor, my mercy. This is what's important. This is what you need to know. You're not going to see my face, but you're going to hear about my name, and you're going to proclaim my name. Basically, and the best thing that God didn't show his face. I just imagine that if that had happened, we would be visiting, until this day, we would be visiting the place where God appeared himself to Moses. And expecting that maybe God would show his face again. Because that's how we human beings act. We think that, oh, God was there. He showed himself to Moses. Well, the theological significance of this is that God is not known for or by our ability to see his glory. He is known by our ability to see or perceive his goodness, his mercy. It's not about dreams, visions, revelations, heavens opening before our own eyes. It's about proclaiming his name. And as we see in chapter 34, verse 6 and on, or starting verse 5, the Lord descended into the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name, the Lord. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for the 1,000 generations, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, yet by no means clearing the guilty, by visiting the iniquity of the parents upon the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. God's proclaiming his name. How do we know that God forgives? If we are offended, sometimes we want a proof from the other person that they really is repentant, or when we offend somebody, we want proof from the other person that they forgive us. How do we know that God forgives? Yeah, it's not going to be through some special vision, revelation, and heavens opening before our eyes, but it's about perceiving, discerning His goodness, His mercy. It's said that one of the hardest things to say to another person is, forgive me, or I'll forgive you. But if this is hard enough, it seems that restoring the relationship after that uh, or after the offense is equally difficult. God was offended. This text shows in a dramatic way. He even refuses to go along with him. But let's say he contains his anger. He contains his anger and he says, okay, fine. I'll go with you. My presence will go. I'm not going personally, but I'll be present there. But not in a visible way, not my glory, but uh, through my name, my name being proclaimed. God's last words are never words of wrath and anger. He cannot remain angry forever. That's why I think this chapter is so emotional. It's dealing with God's emotions. God is mad. He's so mad, he's saying, it's not a good idea for me to go with you. But God is merciful, and he cannot not be merciful. His anger is not for forever. He's gracious. He will show his goodness and mercy. And maybe not in that very visible way. Makes it hard for us. Sometimes we sin. We offend somebody, or we offend God himself. And we ask for forgiveness, and God forgives us. But that offense keeps coming back in our mind. You see? Look at what you did to God. You offended God. How can you be a person like yourself? You're a sinner. Yes, we are sinners, true. But we're also reached by God's grace and mercies. And we also have to trust that even though we don't see his glory, we hear his name being proclaimed. May God bless us and strengthen us, and also that we may, as we are forgiven by God, be able to forgive those who offend us. Amen.